Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to day one of the Digital Transformation Summit organized by Internet and Mobile Association of India. Before we start with our session, I would like to quickly thank our partners, our title partner, Accenture, our track partner, Automation Anywhere, our cloud communication partner, Route Mobile, and our bronze partner, Tata Teleservices. With that, let us now begin with our next session. Our next session is a panel discussion on the topic user data in product lifecycle, enhancing customer experience. And for the same, I would like to welcome our esteemed panelists. First, we have our moderator, Ms. Tina Singh, Chief Digital Officer, Mahindra Finance. We welcome you, Tina. Mr. Prashant Pitti, co-founder, Ease My Trip. Hi, Prashant. Mr. Avinash Godkindi, Managing Director and CEO, Zaggle. Hi, Avinash. And Mr. Ved Narayanan Vedantham, SME and Startup Business Head, Razorpay. We welcome you, Veda. I would now request Tina to please take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to the session on using data in the product life cycle. We have a representation from various industries, travel, payments, automation. Hopefully, this will be a very interesting session because what we have seen in today's day of demanding customers, stiff competition, data is becoming increasingly very important. And data is being used for customer insighting, finding nuggets of information to improve both customer experience and use it for product innovation. So with that, I would like to, start the panel. My first question is to all the panel members. And, I would like, Avinash, you to start. We are seeing all of you working on solving specific customer problems using data. So how do you today use data to solve customer problems and for product innovation?
Thank you for that question, Tina. And thank you to IMAI for giving me the opportunity to speak here. Look, we are a B2B fintech company digitizing spends, right, Tina? So the crucial element for us is to be able to make lives of users, especially employees of our corporate customers, more seamless and more, smooth, while giving the control and while giving the visibility to the corporate. So it's a very tricky balance between trying to make sure that employees are allowed to feel as if they have end-to-end control and seamless experience, while the visibility of data and what's happening through the background data analytics, etc., is there with the corporate and their admin and SPOCs. Right? So the only solution that we see in this is to be able to create a set of rules, and that rule engine runs in the background on the expense management software. And as long as the employee is following the rules and staying within the statutes and the limits that are set by the company, everything goes through smoothly, right? And when they are not, for example, I'll tell you, we have technology including OCR, which allows us to scan the bills and identify fake bills. So if an employee is submitting genuine bills, her bills will get processed much faster. Her bills will be also, her credibility within the system will also go up. So the next time he or she submits the bills, our system is more likely, based on what their track record is of their bills, give the benefit of doubt to the employee, right? And those who submit fake bills, then they are in trouble. The system is able to pick it up, and that, I think, is something which one of the employees said is that, look, your system allows us to be treated in a manner wherein we are innocent until proven guilty. The earlier system was that all of us were guilty, all of us were giving fake bills until it was established that our bills are genuine. So that, I think, is the single most biggest distinguishing factor by using data analytics, how we are able to make life easy for those who are following the rules and staying in the straight and narrow.
Okay. Thank you, Avinash. Prashant, can I request you?
Yes. If you could ask me question again, I was
So
lost.
I was asking like uh, the main question is how do you use user data to
Mhm.
fuel product innovation? How do you use it in the product life cycle? How do you push your organization ahead using data and beat competition?
All right, all right. See, let me just a little bit briefly tell about EaseMyTrip. EaseMyTrip is an OTA where customers can come and buy their travel needs, could be air tickets, hotels, holidays, and whatnots. At EaseMyTrip, we use data pretty extensively to simplify customers' journey with our product. For the matter, we kind of save preferences of whether the customer is looking for a morning flight or an evening flight, and show customers accordingly their first preferences on the top and the preferences which they have not purchased before on the bottom, and accordingly related to the hotel purchases, related to the other services which they take from us. We use data pretty extensively to simplify the usage and the behavior of a customer on our website. By having those endeavors, we even included this in our RHP. RHP is Red Herring Perspective. Our company went public very recently. So one of the things which we were very, very proud of, in declaring was that our average booking time went down from 5 minutes and 20 seconds in year 2019 to 3 minutes and 36 seconds in
Wow.
21. So this for a company, we believe that this is the best approach to allow customers to do what they want to do in a minimal amount of time and then get on with their lives. We actually do not believe in holding customers to our website for a longer duration or to try to sell them the other products, to cross sell them the other products. We believe that customer comes to a website with an intent, and they should get that intent as soon as possible and then carry on forward with their lives. And then there are many other places as well where we're using customers data to exemplify their experience with our website.
Great. Veda, same question. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks for the very interesting question. At Razorpay, which is a end-to-end money movement platform, which takes care of the entire cycle of money movement needs for businesses, large, medium, and small, both inward money movement, they want to receive payments from their customers, and outward money movement through our suite of business banking solutions. We use data in quite a few different ways across the user life. If I can request everybody to go on mute, please. I'm getting some noise back. Yeah. So one of the very interesting ways in which we use data is we have a very intelligent and a very sophisticated lead scoring algorithm, which essentially scores all of the people, all of the merchants, all of the SMEs, and all of the startups that sign up on the Razorpay platform on a variety of different parameters, and basis which kind of industry they come from, whether it's the founder entrepreneur who signed up versus a tech lead, is it a personal email ID versus a business email ID, etc., which is the marketing channel from which these leads have actually come in from. And on the basis of that, we calculate and we create a blended lead score. The higher the lead score, the greater is the propensity or the probability of conversion for that particular business, and the greater is the need for one of Razorpay's payments products for that particular business. So what we do is, for the right customers, we make sure who have a greater need for using one of the payments products of Razorpay, a payment gateway, a payment link, a payment page, we have a high touch service being provided. Right. So essentially those cohorts of customers who have a higher lead score, we make sure that the sales team's bandwidth is being prioritized for getting in touch with those customers. Everybody else comes through the self-serve funnel. This works from two different angles. One is it's better from an internal productivity perspective in terms of optimizing the sales team's bandwidth and resources, and from the perspective of getting in touch only with those merchants and businesses and customers who actually have a need for high touch service. The others we don't even disturb. Yeah. The other interesting way in which we use data really well at Razorpay is in our cross-selling efforts. We have an AI backed, and I know AI is a little bit of is an abuse term in this day and age, and everybody calls everything AI driven and machine learning. But this is really artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms which you have, through which we've created a propensity model, which essentially determines for which particular existing customer of Razorpay I can pitch which product from our entire platform at what time, at what point in their life cycle. What are those points in their life cycle where there is an aha moment that customer has? What are those points in their life cycle where there is a surge in goodwill towards the brand? And how do I tap into those aha moments and for the right customer at the right point, which is that aha moment, I pitch the right product, a payment link, a payment page, a payment gateway, a subscriptions button, or a Razorpay X platform, a current account facility, working capital line of credit. So all of this is driven through a propensity algorithm. So these are two very interesting ways through which at Razorpay we use data for multiple reasons. One, for benefiting customers. Second, of course, is for product innovation, something that you mentioned. And the third, which is also very important, for optimizing and enhancing internal productivity.
Great. Thank you so much, Veda. So let me dig a little deeper. And Prashant, I will start with you. And you're based out of Delhi, and we know there's a pandemic situation now, which has become quite worse out there. And we know since last year, travel and hospitality have been affected quite a lot.
Absolutely.
So how how are your organization is dealing with it, and how are you using all the learnings from the past to make sure that the business doesn't get affected? Would you like to throw some light on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a great question. The entire travel industry has went through a big slump in the last 1.5 years. We at at EaseMyTrip have been trying to overcome it. Of course, the business is down. Even right now, the second wave has hit. However, I'd like to share some examples where we believe that there was a moment of crisis, and as a company, we were able to you know we were able to do better by finding an opportunity in it. The first and the foremost was, as soon as the lockdown was enacted upon in the first time, which was in the end of March. The call volume shot up dramatically for companies like ours. Since all the flights were cancelled, there was a huge chaos. And customers, if every day we were taking around 8,000 to 9,000 calls, we started getting 80,000 calls. And then to top it up, we didn't have people in the call center, right? There was nobody to pick the call. So it wasn't just us, it was like our competitors, even the airlines. We all were facing the same trouble at that time. So we had to think out of the box at that time. And especially we tried routing the calls to our agents who are at home on their mobile, but that wasn't really working very well. To route the calls from our landline number to the agent on their mobile number. So many of the calls were getting disconnected, the lines were not proper. So there were a lot of challenges and the call volume only went up. So within a week, we decided to do something about it, and we integrated WhatsApp with our dashboard within a week. So as soon as this is what we started doing, as soon as somebody would call at EaseMyTrip number, we would disconnect that call automatically, and we will send them the first message automatically on their WhatsApp number from the number they are calling. They will receive that message and they can start chatting with us. And our agents who are sitting at home on our panel were able to read and reply to those messages. So instantaneously, we were able to provide customers a support over WhatsApp rather than on the call. And with this, by the way, we still prefer people. It's been 1.5 years now. Well, a little bit more than 1 year. We still prefer people to message us rather than call us because it is coming out as a double whammy for the company. First, it is great from the customer's perspective. Why would you want to be on hold for half an hour to receive an answer? It's better for you to just drop a message on WhatsApp and then get your reply back, right? And also from the company's perspective, earlier one agent was able to speak to one customer at a time, but now one agent is able to chat with 8 or 9 people simultaneously, giving dual benefit to both the sides. It's a great customer delight, and it works wonderfully for us as well. With this, we actually got a lot of credibility in the market that in those days when nobody was picking calls, EaseMyTrip was taking an initiative by themselves. We were also not picking calls, but we automatically disconnected your call and we messaged you on your WhatsApp, say that, hey, whatever your query, you can type it over here. So we saw our market share jump dramatically just by this shift. And then there are many other things which the company has done during the pandemic times. But I'll let others also talk about it.
Definitely. Avinash, how are you dealing with the pandemic? Of course, and I have a follow-up question on your specific business, but just to complete the thread.
Yes, also, I mean, just like Prashant mentioned, the pandemic was something which I think we thank for. Ahead, I think the ones who are most nimble and innovative the ones who came. Our interaction with customers was, when you offer a software platform to a customer, a lot of it that we do is very tightly and deeply integrated with a payment product, which is our card product, right? And most of our card issuance pre-pandemic was all physical. So about 9% of the cards that we were issuing pre-pandemic were in a physical card form. And we assumed that, getting customers to start accepting a virtual card is going to be a journey. It's going to be taking maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years, right? But because of the pandemic and because of the whole scenario where a lot of people just did not want to receive a courier, didn't want to touch anything, as much as possible, go online, go digital, we saw our, ratio flip. So we became 9% virtual and 10% physical, and this literally happened overnight, right? Thankfully, our systems were always built and geared towards, a virtual platform, because that's what in the medium to long term we wanted to do, right? So a lot of our competition failed. They were not able to cope with the expectation of a complete end-to-end digital experience, whether it's on KYC, whether it's on onboarding, the whole journey and experience. For us, I think we were prepared for it, and we embraced it. The credit goes to our team as well as Dragon, where everybody were thinking like that, and when it happened, they could see that it's a beautiful opportunity just to move the market in that direction, take a market leadership position. And because they were able to do such a good job, we saw a lot of companies like, say, Microsoft. Microsoft gave a very big, contract to us because they said that you're the only ones who are willing to end-to-end fulfill a reward program completely digitally, right? Right from every touch point was digital, whereas a lot of other players were offering it part digital, part physical, right? So I'm just giving you one example. So we saw that, by being able to offer what the market wanted at the right time, we were able to cope much better with the pandemic than others.
Thank you, Avinash. So, Vida, how did Razorpay, and I know there has been a boom in payments, and every small merchant is today taking online payments. So, how did you guys come up very quickly with products and use customer insights to manage the situation?
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster journey, Tina, over the last year or so. Obviously, we've seen a huge boom of businesses gravitating towards digital payments. But some of the things and obviously Razorpay has been, at the forefront of, making sure that we are able to, provide a lot of these businesses who are embracing digital for the first time, the right kind of experience, the right kind of digital payment solutions. But some of the things that we have done really well in order to make sure that we're able to deliver customer delight is to keep our ears very close to the ground and having a very strong pulse of the customer sentiment. We noticed that particularly more so because of the pandemic, the need state and the demographic makeup of the average startup and the SME entrepreneur seems to have fundamentally changed. Earlier, the average digital entrepreneur was somebody who was probably like a Harshil or a Shashank, right? The co-founders of Razorpay, who had a very strong understanding of digital and understood the nuts and bolts and the nitty-gritties of digital and technology. The new age digital entrepreneur understands the importance of digital, but doesn't quite understand, nor do they care about understanding the details and nuts and bolts of the technology inner workings. They want all of that abstracted away from them. They want all of that complexity abstracted away from them because either A, they don't want to know, or they don't have the technological wherewithal to actually understand tech and do coding. So they want digital payments and digital products which are a lot more democratized, which are a lot more easy to use, which are a lot more intuitive, which is why at Razorpay we launched a slew of what we internally call #no-code products. During the year of the pandemic, right? Which is like a payment link, a payment page, a payment button, where you don't have to go through the hassle of an integration, a technology integration per se. And you can start using them in under 5 minutes, even if you don't know anything about tech, anything about coding, without writing a single line of code. So that has been a huge boon for the startup and the SME ecosystem. And that has really resonated well with our audiences. And the other interesting thing that we've been noticing, which has been again an offshoot of our customer research, is the fact that earlier startups and SMEs followed a certain set life cycle pattern when it came to embracing digital. It was about setting up a digital brand presence first. Let me set up a website. Let me set up an Instagram page. Let me set up a Facebook page. I'll think about digital payments as an afterthought. But now things have changed. People are in a hurry. They want to start receiving payments really quickly and they want to do it yesterday. And again, particularly because of the pandemic itself. It's almost been like we've been sitting in a time machine and we've woken up 5 years down the line. And the kind of change that we've seen in the last 9, 12 months has been what we might have seen in a 4 or a 5 year horizon. And this has been accelerated because of the pandemic. Now, because now going back to the point that I was making earlier, where SMEs are now skipping ahead and jumping steps and looking to set up digital payments infrastructure first and or looking for two-in-one solutions which serve as a digital brand presence building vehicle, something that gives them an anchor in the digital ecosystem and helps them put their brand out there. And they're also looking at digital payments avenues, which is why a payment page product, for example, from Razorpay has been a big hit because it doubles up as both, a digital brand presence building vehicle. People who don't have time to, set up a website, set up a storefront and all of that. Plus it allows them to start receiving payments. So by keeping our ears very close to the ground, having a very strong sense of the customer pulse, we've been able to launch products during the year of the pandemic, obviously everybody working remote, which have resonated really well with our audiences.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So now moving on to a little bit more long term, hopefully we'll come out of this situation and fingers crossed, like I'm giving it a 3 month time frame for all of us in India to get back to normal, or at least like, at least make sure that, things are really stable. We'll all obviously will have to make sure that everybody takes care and, I think that has become a kind of a lifestyle. Going forward, maybe masks will remain forever, but still things will be better, hopefully very soon. So Avinash, coming to your main business, right? Zaggle is in office automation, and of what I have seen in corporates, the problem that you're trying to solve is a larger mindset problem. I've seen corporates with large back offices, and even today, the employees are, asked to submit receipts and fill in vouchers and do a lot. It's very tedious. What they have to go through month on month to get their reimbursements or payments, etc. So forget the employee side of things. How do you tackle, because corporate is equally your customer, right?
Absolutely.
So how do you tackle the corporate side of things? How do you convince them, to take your product? And what are the recent innovations which have really worked from you from that point of view?
Sure. So, Tina, I think most important is to understand the psyche of the decision makers, whether it's the CFO's office or anybody who's there in the corporate side. Their biggest concern, at least in the CFO's office that we've seen, is to be able to have a fair degree of control as to what the expenses are. And again, as Veda said, its journey has moved 5 years in 12 months, right? So we are in a fast forward mode. So a lot of stuff that CFOs and possibly CEOs wanted to do over the course of 3 to 5 years, they have condensed and pushed it in these 12 months, simply because the cost pressures are tremendous, and no CFO or CEO that I have interacted with, or definitely no chief people officer, wants to let go of anybody if they can do anything to retain the employee, right? I have not come across anybody, at least in my circle, who said, let's first think of hiring, right? That's the last thing that a company wants to do. And if you can cut costs without having to lose employees, just by being more efficient, that hits so much harder. The other thing that happens, Tina, is that earlier in the old model, every piece of information that a corporate was trying to ascertain was done bit by bit, literally through Excel sheets and through verifying bills and stuff like that. So there was a lot of hard work that people had to put in the back office, and wanted to make sure that everything is perfect. In that process, things got delayed, and also it was a lot of effort, and it's very tedious to be actually going through people's bills. It's a very boring and mundane task. When you automate that, people really feel that, okay, I am not in the process of giving convenience to my employee or my stakeholder, I'm not letting go of control. I'm not going slack on my process. My process is also much tighter today and much more efficient because we've gone digital, right? And at the heart of the solution lies this balance, wherein you're giving more control and efficiency to the corporate, while at the same time giving convenience to the employee. And as we explain that to a corporate and we actually show it, this is how it would work. We've seen that the resistance goes down significantly. One last point, practically when people started to work from home, how do you check those bills? How do you collate those bills? And now, where do you store them? So one of the very large customers that we had came to us in traditional company, right? Came to us and said, look, my finance guys, their homes are full of bills. Where do they store these bills? And we said, we store bills for 10 years digitally, right? And you need them for your income tax audits or any other internal audits that you may have. And that really sold it for them, because it said that anything happens in this person's house, or he moves homes, still that data is on the cloud. Right? It's there with the company and it's on the cloud. So that is a very big plus for companies today.
Okay, thank you, Avinash. That has triggered a thought in my mind, but I'll come to you later. So, Prashant, how do you think the travel industry, given whatever you have seen now of customer behavior and what's happening, and there's a lot of start-stop in travel. New restrictions are coming every day, and the moment things open, like there's a deluge of people wanting to travel. The cost sometimes skyrocket, sometimes government puts a cap on the prices. So this is short term, but in the long term, how do you see travel industry changing fundamentally?
So in the long term, we are making some bets, and one of the bets is basically related to staycation. We believe that during the pandemic times, people have learned how to stay in an apartment or in a villa or in a house, while just keeping that thing for themselves. And of course, there are certain drawbacks over there. You don't get butler service, you don't get your breakfast along with it and stuff like that. However, even then, we believe that people are enjoying the luxury of the space for themselves. So that is one space where we really, really believe that things are going to move forward very fast and very rapidly. Second thing which we are noticing is, of course, there will be a downturn in corporate travel. A lot of corporate travel, wherever you need a high impact meeting, probably it will be in person. But wherever things can be avoided, corporate probably will try to avoid. Thankfully, at EaseMyTrip, we were not too dependent on corporate travel. Only 3% of our business constitutes corporate travel. Remaining is basically a B2C business. However, we do see an impact coming from there, that side. And the third angle, which we really believe which will happen is, just see the trend of what has happened in China or what's happening in America right now. We as a human, we have been literally binded at our homes for last year and few months. So we are a very, very, I mean, we wish that this situation ends, the sooner the better. And you'll have to look at the trend of what has happened in Israel and what has happened in UK. These are the only two countries where they have vaccinated more than 60% population. So if you see the trend, as soon as they cross 30% people being vaccinated, their daily new cases drop dramatically. So you could get a sense that once a country crosses 30% people vaccination, you kind of develop herd immunity or something like that. So I'm really, really hopeful. We are big believers in our frontline workers and the government policy of vaccinating people. We are giving 35 lakh jabs a day. So my guess is also, as what you said, that if you do the math, we'll probably cross 30% people at least getting one vaccination dose in next 2.5 to 3 months. So that is also my best guess, that we should start seeing things improve dramatically. I think the peak has already reached. I hope the peak has already reached and whatever damage has done is done. But yes, once this pandemic is over, we really believe that the tourism industry is going to be the biggest beneficiary. People have had it far too long to be stuck in their homes. And we believe that the tourism industry will boom such that we will not be able to meet the demands, what is going to come in the next few months once the pandemic is kind of closed.
Okay, thank you so much. So Vedant, next question to you. How do you see the future of the payments industry, like given the exponential growth which has happened in this area? How do you see the trends in on the retail side and on, of course, on the SME side? What do you think is next for payments, and how is your company planning to manage customer expectation or capture the next wave?
That's an interesting question. And I think one thing that I can state with confidence is that this is a permanent change. I don't think things will ever go back to how they were pre-COVID in a lot of different ways. I think a lot of the changes that we're seeing in terms of businesses going digital, consumers gravitating more and more towards digital, I think that is a baseline, permanent, fundamental shift which is here to stay. Having said, and we've also seen a lot of lead indicators at Razorpay. We often think of ourselves as an index fund that sits on top of the entire startup and the SME ecosystem in the country, in the business community in the country, because we have a ringside perspective of the entire cycle of money movement that happens. And what some of the lead indicators that we have seen, which give me the sense of confidence, is this. Most of the new businesses that are signing up on Razorpay today for digital payments are first time users of digital, period. Forget about digital payments. These are not people moving over from one competitive player to another, right? These are people who are first time new entrants to the digital ecosystem. These are either embarking on their business journey for the first time or embarking on their digital journey for the first time, which I think is extremely encouraging. Almost 30% of the new people who are signing up on Razorpay today are people who were previously running fairly successful brick and mortar retail businesses, right? And now want to go omni-channel or want to take their business digital, which I think is extremely interesting. And we've been observing this trend only increasing in the last 12, 15 months or so. And some other trends that we've been observing is that we're not just seeing a huge acceleration in terms of sheer customer acquisition momentum, not just in terms of the sheer volume of businesses moving towards digital, but we are also seeing each of these businesses process more monies through the Razorpay ecosystem, which essentially attests to the kind of strong product market fit that they have, and they are not just flaky fly-by-night operators, which I think has been very interesting. We're seeing a lot of growth from tier 2, tier 3 and below, which I think is very interesting. A lot of businesses, entrepreneurs coming in from tier 2, tier 3 and below. So it's not just about Mumbai and Bangalore and Chennai and Hyderabad and Delhi and Calcutta, right? It's about a lot of people from Rail Bharat and tier 2, tier 3 and below who are actually coming forward and setting up businesses servicing the local economy there. Every week I speak to at least 5 SME customers and startups. And for example, the previous week I was talking to a homemaker who was an astrology consultant who does palm reading, and she's now doing palm reading on Zoom calls. And she used to collect payments using cash before, but now her customers, obviously, they don't want to pay using cash. And now she uses Razorpay payment links for receiving her payment. So it's been a lot of such interesting use cases are coming up. Where I attended a wedding, by the way, on a completely unrelated note, which was on Zoom. The bride and the groom were in the same place. Thankfully, the priest was in a completely different place, which I thought was very interesting. And so all of these different changes are happening. And I think a lot of these changes in terms of move towards digital, a lot of these changes are here to stay. I'm also seeing a certain level of reverse migration happening, which probably for the first time in India's history, right? In the last 30 years or so, people have been flooding urban India, right? Everybody is coming into Mumbai and Bangalore, and the infrastructure has been creaking in a lot of these cities for a while now. And I think for the first time ever, given that you now have, at least for the people who are lucky enough to have it, people who are in white collar jobs, who have the luxury of being all they need is an internet connection and a device to be able to work from wherever they are. And thanks to 4G, you can literally work from anywhere. I think that again will mean that a lot of people might choose to, and we've already seen that trend. They're moving back to, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. They're spending time with their parents, their ecosystem, their relatives, having better quality of life, lower cost of living, lesser traffic, lesser pollution, better health. We are already seeing this trend happening. And I think that trend will also accelerate. So in a lot of different ways, both in terms of levels of digital adoption, just in terms of the population concentration in our major cities, I think we'll see a lot of fundamental, potentially permanent changes. If say 2021, there was no pandemic, maybe things would have gone back to where it was, pre-Feb 2020, before the pandemic. But given that we've been hit with the second wave, which has been even more deadly than the first one, I think a lot of these changes are here to stay. And at Razorpay, again, we've launched a lot of new products which have been essentially speaking to some of these need state. For example, we know that more than half of our sales team's conversations, increasingly more so, are not in English. They are in local vernacular. So the SME businessmen and the entrepreneurs coming on board, they are not like the Sachin Bansal, Vinny Bansal, Harshil, Harshil and Shashank Kumar, Harshil Mathur, Shashank Kumars of the world, right? IITs, smooth talking, VC funded startups, right? It's not them. These are people who are more comfortable in a Hindi or a Tamil or a Bengali or a Telugu. It's not as if they don't understand English. They're a lot more comfortable in local vernacular. So at Razorpay, we have let them speak their end customers' language. We've launched local vernacular checkout, so they can actually provide checkout solutions and payment solutions, experiences for their end customers. These businesses can do that using Razorpay's local vernacular, checkout stack, which has been again, it's been a big hit with the SME master. So a lot of very interesting winds of change, and I think a lot of these winds of change are here to stay.
Thank you, Veda. So a question for all of you, and Veda, why don't you continue? So the fundamental issue with most of the organization and many people in our audience will be, looking forward to your answers to this question is, one, how do you capture the data? So how do you make sure all these insights that you're talking about are captured somewhere, are available for your product teams, analytic teams, etc., to process further? Second, once the data has been successfully captured, how do you create a systematic process of innovation coming out of there? Because it's everywhere. Like there's data scattered everywhere. They say that corporates in across the world are the largest owners of data. They just don't know what to do with it.
It's an interesting question. I have a couple of different mantras to to address this. One is, as business leaders, one of our primary tasks are to ask the right questions. And then figure out what are the data points you need, what are all of the nuts and bolts that are needed to actually answer that question. It's important for us to frame and articulate the right question. So as long as we are very clear, everybody wants to have all of these glorified visualizations and data dashboards, etc., which have like 50 different fields, and people probably don't look at 49 of those or 48 of those and just look at just 2 or 3 of those only. So you need to be very clear on what are the critical data points that you need and ask the right questions. And I was reading this article earlier by somebody I really admire, who essentially said, how can you make sure that you continually focus on, if you've got, say, a management dashboard or a management cockpit, right, which you refer to on a daily basis, how can you make sure that you continuously look at ways and means to prune that, to make sure that you're only having those data points that are actually adding value and not actually adding more data points. All of us want to add more data points and look at more granular data and slice and dice data and look at a lot of detail. In a lot of cases, it doesn't become actionable and it doesn't really add too much of incremental insight. So how can you make sure that you're able to have an MVP, so to speak, a minimum viable product of data which is being handed to you on a platter, which actually adds value, on the basis of which you can come out with some actionable insights, and which again is a manifestation of or an offshoot of you asking the right questions, which I think is one of the most important things which needs to be in place.
Thank you, Venkat. Avinash, your take on it. What are the best practices, so that the data which comes to the organization is used wisely and for enhancing customer experience?
Yeah, so I partly echo what Veda said, right? One is less is more, especially at the senior level. It's very easy for, at the CXO level to get large data, but you need to understand what really matters to your business. But I'll just take that level further. What we essentially do, is we have a team of data guys, so to say, data analysts, who work on the data at the raw level, right? And they are able to then distinguish what may be of value to us and what's not of value to us. And you keep constantly iterating. One of the things which I think all of us agree, but we need to build a process internally to be able to figure out at what points do you iterate, how quickly do you iterate, and keep iterating and seeing whether this is even making sense or not, right? I think the second thing is also in our case, because a lot of the data is employees, and it's employees of corporates, businesses. So there are a lot of privacy concerns as well, right? So we are extraordinarily careful about how we, manage that data, store that data, look at that data, because it's very easy to get carried away in saying, let's do, 50 different things with this data, right? But at the core of it is your trust that you earn with your users and your corporate customers or business customers, and we honestly believe that doing too less things with the data, but not breach the trust, rather than just being too overzealous and trying to do 50 different things with it. So we've actually refrained from doing a lot of players in our space who want to cross-sell, upsell a lot of things to the employees of companies like I mentioned, right? Aon, Avid, Infosys, Microsoft, you name it. But we've refrained from that urge to go ahead and sell to those employees, simply because they don't want to be sold any new insurance or any new financial service package. They already had enough of it. But interestingly, there are some companies who come back and said, we trust you. We want you to create curated, offers, or not offers, but we want you to scout the market and come back with both wealth management solutions for our employees, as well as some very strong insurance options. And that's great validation of what we are doing, because when it comes from the corporate, that tells you that they trust us to be able to do this stuff. And these are very, very large companies. These are companies with more than 1 lakh employees. I can't mention the name of the company, but that's what we're doing for them.
So Tina, just a quick point, you also asked about product innovation, right? So apart from asking the right question, it's also important that you have the right kind of team structure which can drive product innovation and experimentation. And just to foster the spirit of experimentation, one of the things that we do is we have somebody whose dedicated focus is to run experiments. And the way we measure that person's success every month is the person needs to have at least 2 failures every quarter. There need to be at least 2 experiments that have bombed, right? And that essentially is which are new things a person has tried, not something that he's already tried before we know will work and the person has just screwed up execution, but essentially 2 new things that the person has tried, innovative ideas that this person has tried, which have failed. And because if you don't have enough failures, it means that it's just not trying hard enough. So I just thought I'll mention that in terms of team structure, just for building that culture of innovation and culture of experimentation.
Okay. So, Prashant, my question, same question, that how do you use data to drive innovation? And one second, there's a question which has come from the audience, and maybe you can answer that as well along with this. It says, how easy or difficult is it to capture customer feedback and keep doing product modification? What metrics should a co-founder only for you keep in mind while making this modification, like cost benefit analysis?
Great. I'll start with the question which you asked. I completely echo with the thought which the other panelists have said. First and foremost thing is to set up the right team. You need to have the right team who actually are capable to look at the data and answer the questions which you have. Usually the questions from the co-founder levels are that what are the ways by which you could increase your conversions? See, marketing guy's job is to basically get as many people on your platform, and then the data basically talks about how do you convert them better. What are the reasons why people are buying? What are the reasons why people have not buying? Where did they leave? Why did they leave? What could be the constraints because of which they had to close that window and move away? So you have to set up the right data analyst team, data scientists who look at those data and who are able to answer those data. Internally, however, within the teams, we have only kept very few KPIs, key performing indexes.
Okay.
So for each particular team, we have only 2 or 3 KPIs, which they have to present every month. And by only having 2 or 3 KPIs, you ensure that they are also very focused on that particular number. And that number is not necessarily just increase the sales. As I said, that number could be many other things. That how do you, one of the numbers which we have kept across most of our team is basically NPS, Net Promoter Score. How are we making more and more people are, liking our product? The other is basically related to conversion. The third one is related to how quick the payments and the resolutions have happened, because there are a lot of refund cases which happen in companies like ours. So these are the answers by which we have a look at very, as at the co-founder level, we look at the data and we understand that this is what is going right in the company and this probably needs to be improved. But rest all, how to play with that data is basically data scientist job and data analyst job, and you provide them tools to play with those things. The question which we got in the chat was, okay, how do you capture the customer feedback? See, customer feedback comes from various sources. It comes from social media, it comes via email, it comes via messages. I think one of the best ways to get customer feedback is via WhatsApp. We are in love with that product. As soon as a transaction is over, we send them a message on WhatsApp proactively asking them if there are any feedbacks which they would want to share. And usually we do get some replies which become incremental, which incrementally adds value to the company. So with that customer feedback, one thing which we have done very specifically, very recently, and it has helped us tremendously, is that in companies like us, there are always a lot of anomalies. One particular person, he needed to cancel his flight because of, let's say, they were going on a honeymoon, but the COVID happened, and because of that, they have to cancel all of it. And now the person is saying that this is too much of money for me to lose for the refund purposes. What do I do? How do I get that money back? So what we have done is we have created a kitty, which is basically around 1 to 1.5% of our entire GMV. We did business of around 4,200 crores. So we created a kitty, and that kitty we have given the complete authority to our operations team. That, hey, this is the kitty you have, and there are no questions asked. If you feel genuine that this person's concerns are genuine, and as a company we should help them, then please go ahead and use it. You don't need to take any approval from anybody. So they know that they have to stay within that budget, which we feel is a very good budget. But these are for anomaly cases, because most of the time the thought process or the intentions of most of the companies are in the right place. However, the process of getting approval itself is very excruciating. From executive to manager, then from manager to senior manager, then the co-founder, if the monies are in the order of lakhs for that matter, right? But if you have given them a kitty to the executive level, that this is the kitty you have for every month, feel free to use it in cases where you think that this is a very important feedback which we have received. This customer is really in trouble. Please feel free to use it. You don't even have to tell your manager. You can tell it later, but you could go ahead and give that redemption to that person right away. So this kind of processes has helped us really a lot, where customer feels that he's been taken care of in the first call itself, in the first message itself. These are the processes which I think most of the companies should start, where allowing their ground level staff to utilize the funds in the best possible manner by keeping their heart in the right direction.
Right, great. So I time left. I had one or two more questions from you. So Prashant, I am very curious about Embrace Chat and the new product that you have launched. So I wanted to know a little bit about it and what is the kind of problem that you're trying to solve, because you're talking about WhatsApp again and again. So I thought, let me just ask you this.
Well, yeah, basically, as I told you, that we saw this as a learning for ourselves, that getting a message to a company is much better than receiving a call or an email, from both perspectives, from the customer's perspective and also from the from the user's perspective. Embrace Chat is nothing but that, where companies can integrate all their social media in one particular platform. As a customer, if a customer is messaging them from WhatsApp, from Facebook, from Twitter, or any other platform, all those gets integrated and comes very beautifully in one dashboard for your agents to see and read and reply. So I don't want to pitch that company over here. This is not the right place to do it. But yes, this is basically an internal learning. We found it to be so helpful for ourselves. We thought that let's just create a separate company so that we can help other entrepreneurs and other organizations.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. We're coming to the close of the session, but very interesting insights. And I can see that, with the increase of digitization, the number of data points that we capture from customer has increased. And it is very heartening to see, that all of you and your organizations are using this data to improve customer experience, give new products. And I wanted to ask a question on privacy, but I think Avinash answered that as well, that, as long as you use the data and do not, push the limit with the customer, that's the way to go, and you can really, really go places with it.
Thank you.
Thank you
So much to all the panelists. Thank you, Tina. Thank you to everybody else for joining in. Thank you to the audience for the amazing questions. We will be back soon with yet another exciting session. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you and stay safe.
Care, stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.